Hey everybody. So welcome to Early Western Civ, Chapter 5. We begin the first of 3 chapters on the Rome. Sometimes I'll say Roman Empire. Make sure, as you get into it, you understand the Roman Empire isn't until the end. Initially it is a republic. Well, initially it's a monarchy, then a republic. I'll say Roman Empire sometimes. Just understand that there's a specific time period. That the empire really starts after 44 B.C.E. Okay, so it's after that. Even if I say it at this point in time, it's not really an empire at this point. So we're going to talk about the first part of Rome here, and then we have 2 more chapters on it. Starts 753 B.C.E. to 44 B.C., so we cover, what, about 700 years or so here. So this is a bronze statue of Romulus and Remus suckling at the she-wolf. This represents one of the creation myths of the Roman Empire. Romulus and Remus, who were descended from gods, were left out in the wild. They were taken in by a she-wolf and raised. This is supposed to indicate strength and power and, how they are special. This would never happen for normal human babies. Powerful, like a Roman, like a powerful wolf. Eventually, Romulus slays his brother, and he founds Rome. Romans created other myths about their founding. Certainly, other types of myths as well. We're not exactly positive. I mean, we doubt this is probably true. It's a myth, of course. Rome lasted around 1,250 years, which is an incredible amount of time. I mean, look at the United States. We've really been a country for about 250 years. So we would have to continue with this grand experiment, the United States, for another millennia, just to match what the Romans did. So in the grand scheme of empires, and the United States is an empire, with both the positive and negative connotations of that, we'd have to survive another 1,000 years. Again, the grand scheme of things, we're still a relatively young empire, generally. The Eastern Roman Empire lasted 1,000 years longer than that. So if you want to put it all together, as some do, Rome, the Roman Empire, lasted over 2 millennia, over 2,000 years. So for us, we would have to survive until, the year 4000. We'd have to survive another 2,000 years to even begin. Probably won't happen, just the way things are. Anyway, section 1 in this chapter, I'm not going to go over. I'm going to do a little brief summary here of a couple of high points from section 1, but I'm not going to do that. You have it in your book, and you'll be responsible for it. But I just, I don't plan on taking any exam questions off of it, and, probably not a quiz question off of anything in section 1. Section 1 is about Roman social and religious traditions. So again, I'm going to start with 2, but I'm going to do a little brief summary here. Romans really valued virtue, which was seen as primarily a masculine identity or a masculine quality. What did Roman virtue? They called it virtus. What it really mean is it stood for strength, loyalty, and courage, especially in the face of adversity, warfare, challenge, competition. So they really valued wisdom and purity. They also believed in faithfulness, keeping your obligations, respect for family. Religion was also related to this faithfulness. You always had to show proper respect to the gods. You were supposed to limit your emotions. You were not supposed to be an emotional person. You were supposed to be calm, cool, collected at all times, very stoic. You were supposed to be respected by others for living this way, and respect others for living this way. This this life of respect and quiet certitude. I'm not sure it's a word, but certainty, I guess, is the better way to put it. Men achieved really status by living a respectful life and gaining respect from others and respecting other people of their proper social station. Social status, class, was very important in Roman society. And women really gained status by raising good Roman children and having a good, successful family, that kind of stuff. Elites were especially supposed to live up to this. The basis of Roman social system was patron-client, to where everybody had a duty to either somebody above or below them. It was about this patron-client system, to where you had a responsibility to your clients had a responsibility to you. Lots of benefits of this. Lots of obligations associated with it, and these obligations can be passed down generation to generation. So your children and your children's children would have similar relationships of patron and client. No matter what patron you were, you had clients. No matter what client you were, usually there was somebody above you. Usually it was this tiered system, this hierarchical system. The Roman family was the foundation, really the foundation of all of Roman society. It taught values, and ownership of property was really significant in the Roman Republic, Roman society. You always deferred to the father's power. Father is often referred to as a paterfamilias. You'll see a lot of Latin in this. The paterfamilias is the father of the family, and you're expected to respect him. He was a family of everybody. Family, workers, employees, slaves, everyone. He was considered to be the father of the entire family, and everybody was to respect him. Women had some influence in Roman society. We do see that the more respectable upper class women, I'm not saying they took a direct place in politics, but they could influence politics. They could influence the men. High-born women were given proper respect, and therefore they also had some degree of power. This really only applied, though, to elites, truthfully. Let's see. Education was important. Education was about teaching values and literature and language. Usually only the rich, upper class, the wealthy got educated. Common people didn't usually get educated. There wasn't no public schools or things like that. Boys were expected to prepare for fighting. In addition, they were supposed to get cultured as well. You were supposed to be just as able fighter as, I don't know, poet or musician. You're supposed to be able to do it all, especially for the middle and upper class, which again, those are really the only ones that got educated. And if you were not that middle and upper class, you were just a common laborer, and you just did pretty much whatever your father did. Your daughter, you did whatever your mother did. Kind of stuff like that. There was religion that both was for the public and the private. There was different types of religion. In a way, religion was it followed really the model of the Greek religion. It's the same gods, by the way. Much of what Rome is one of the things that made it so successful is they simply adopted and assimilated other cultures. They absorbed them into their society, taking the best parts of it that they thought were the best and discarding the rest. And Rome really was just an amalgamation of a bunch of different cultures across Afro-Eurasia that they simply assimilated in, and so we see that. It's very interesting. So the Roman gods are simply the Greek gods, pretty much identical. They just gave them different names. Jupiter was Zeus in the Greeks. Juno was the Greek Hera. Minerva was the Greek Athena. Stuff like this. Gods were supposed to protect the city. Gods were supposed to protect people. So there were gods that were designed for the city. Religion was really a state function. Think of it this way. Religion in Rome was like a branch of the government. It really was. It was seen as it was a place you could actually aspire to. You could get elected into. You could get appointed into positions in the religious. It isn't priests like we think of today. It wasn't religion. It was more of a career choice. And it was like a part of government. It was a branch of government. It was no different than, honestly, it was really no different than working for the Department of Transportation, Department of Agriculture. Same thing. You simply was a Department of Religion. Religion was a state function. It was really about making sure that the gods were happy, so Rome did well. About the stability of Roman society, really. You perform rituals. You would do stuff like that. You were to conduct peace with the gods. They would conduct sacrifices, festivals, prayers, stuff like that. Quite interesting stuff. Really, quite interesting stuff. All right. So that's just a very simple rundown of sort of some of the aspects of Roman society, and it gives you an idea of what it was like to be in Rome, the most basics, and what Roman life was like and family was like. Now we're going to get into a little bit more detail on the following section. So, from monarchy to republic. For about the first 250 years, 753 to 509, Rome is considered a monarchy. The Romans were under the authority of the Etruscans, which was another ethnic group, another group on the peninsula. You'll see a map of it in a moment. The Etruscans. All right, let's start at the beginning. How did Rome become so powerful? Where did it really start? All right, we have almost no direct evidence about the founding of Rome. Almost everything we have about, because it was, 700 BCE, so we have very little. We have very little writing from the Etruscans, actually. We're really limited in what we have there. And we think part of that is that the Romans destroyed it. The Romans really, really were known for what we would really refer to as revisionist history. They love to change history to match their current goals, their current aims, the current political ideology. They would simply rewrite what had happened in the past. They did this. So they did with the Etruscans. So after the Etruscans are defeated and the Romans take over, the Etruscans are not written out of history, but a lot of it is. Literally, they would rub their faces. They would take their faces off of statues. There's evidence that they would smooth over where they had writing on stone and completely erase it, and then carve new stuff on top of it. Yeah. So, all right. So we don't know much about the founding of Rome. There was the legend of Romulus and Remus I talked about. There was the legend of the 7 kings. That Rome was ruled by a series of 7 kings. These were probably the Etruscan kings. Not actually Roman. Again, they're a different ethnic group. They were from northern Italy, we think, closer to Europe. They were not really Italian. They were probably migrants. They were probably migratory, as so many groups were in Europe. Constantly moving around and migrating was very common in European continent. We really know little about them. The Romans overthrew them and then basically erased their memory as much as possible. These kings created the Senate, which is really significant. They create the Senate. I'm still on the first one. So the Senate, which is this body of advisors, and these advisors then were supposed to advise the king. The king still had the power, but these advisors would help make laws, give recommendations, and the king would basically checkmark everything. But still, the real power was held by the kings. This also laid the foundations for Rome's growth by assimilating outsiders and granting citizenship to slaves in this time period. Rome grew quickly early on under the Etruscans. They were aggressive and they were imperialistic. This was actually sort of a little empire. The Etruscans were, we call it a kingdom, we call it a monarchy, because they were kings, divine kings. But still, they were imperialistic because what they did is they conquered other small towns and communities around them, forming this early beginnings of Rome. So during this 250 years of monarchy, Rome underwent lots of expansion. They took added a lot of population, took territory. Rome was really a place of the outsider, the foreigner. Much of Rome's population, all through its history, was comprised of foreigners. It was a very cosmopolitan city and empire that brought in people from all around the world, eventually to this place. There's a saying in a later time period, all roads lead to Rome. This idea that Rome was the center of the world. The Romans certainly thought so. But even the Etruscan kings, when Rome was really small, relatively speaking, still thought they were really important and really significant. Just in the first 250 years, they gained control of probably over 300 square miles of supporting land. Population with a population of probably 30, 40, 50,000 people in the countryside. The Romans came from central Italy. The Romans are actually Italian. They come from the Italian peninsula. Rome had a good location, good fertile soil, surrounded by water, so easy access to water for fishing, for shipping, for trade. It was really perfectly situated for international trade. It was like literally right in the middle of the Mediterranean, with easy access to northern Africa, Asia, and of course Europe. And halfway, it actually had access to exit the Mediterranean out into the Atlantic Ocean. Really great location. Worked out really well for them. Roman culture gained from contact with lots of other cultures. Neighboring areas that helped them expand, especially the Greeks, who had settlements in southern Italy. So we know a lot of the early Roman population were not Romans, whether it be Etruscans or Greeks, because the Greeks had settled all along the Italian peninsula. So a lot of early Roman peoples were not actually Roman; they were Greek. A lot of them were. Probably a good reason why Roman culture is so heavily influenced by the Greeks. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Very logical. Much of what we think today of as Roman simply came from other populations, came from the Etruscans, came from the Greeks. Truthfully, what is actually Roman of the Roman people? That were really just small groups of common people in central Italy, maybe very little. As far as what was really, quote unquote, Roman. So much of them borrowing and having cross-cultural contacts and absorbing all the cultures from other peoples makes us really blur what is actually Roman as far as of the Roman ethnic group. Not much. Most of what is Roman of the Republic and later Empire is really just this collection of all kinds of different cultures all put together, is really with that. They used what appealed to them. They made revisions to change their ideas, values, circumstances. As a result, Roman is really this amalgamation of dozens of different cultures. So here we see Etruria, that's the Etruscans. We see Rome right there. You see Rome was actually... You see, look at the different groups here. We have the Etrurians, the Latiums, that's where we get the term Latin, the Romans, Greeks, you have Gauls up here, you have Carthaginians here. That's just a few of the groups. There's other groups too. Variety of different languages and different cultures. Rome, you can find people who are light skin, dark skin, brown skin. It really is this... the nature of Italy itself, because people had been traipsing back and forth across Mediterranean Ocean for thousands of years by this time, doing trade and colonization and exploration. Rome was just sort of this place in the middle that people just got stuck or stopped. You couldn't sail from one side of the Mediterranean to the other without running into Italy, without running into the Italian lands. I mean, that is it right there. I mean, this is Carthage. This is Africa. So you've got Italy right here. So you can't go across the Mediterranean without running into Italy, which meant it really just sort of almost like flypaper. Flies fly around and they just get stuck. So all these ships and boats, by this point in time, thousands, hundreds of thousands of boats have been crossing across the Mediterranean, and a lot of them just get stuck. They find places to settle. The Italian peninsula, before Rome really becomes a major power, probably had hundreds of small towns and communities speaking dozens of languages, which is really what allows Rome to be so successful. That's why they were able to conquer so many peoples and continue to move forward. They were so adaptable, so flexible. It worked really well. We have an Etruscan tomb of leopards here. The Etruscan tomb of leopards. And as you can see the writing. Oh, wait, there's no writing. We have very little left over from the Etruscans. much of them was simply erased by the Romans. We know little about them. We're not even positive where they came from. They weren't Italian, so they had to have come someplace in Europe, probably. They might have even come from the ocean. In other words, they might have come from a whole other continent and just come and settled in southern Europe hundreds of years earlier, and, of course, grew wealthy and powerful and were able to conquer much of Italy. It's beautiful, though. I mean, it really is. And we'll see the Romans take on much of this. The Romans with the leaves around the head, the hairstyle, much of this becomes Roman. But, of course, it was Etruscan. This is the tomb of an Etruscan. It's pretty, though. It really is. It's interesting, though, if you look at it and you think about it, and you were to compare this to Egyptian art, very similar. So there is some suggestion by some that the Etruscans may have actually come from northern Africa. Long time ago, centuries, maybe millennia earlier, but it's possible that they might have come from northern Africa. But even that doesn't make them African. We don't know, because much of northern Africa was settled by the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians came from the Middle East. There was so much movement going on in this time period between all these early civilizations, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, and then that's just the major groups. There's lots of smaller ones too. Really, the Mediterranean was a culture unto itself. A huge mixture of multiple ethnicities, languages, and cultures all mashed together and constantly overlapping and intermixing and interchanging ideas. It's really hard to know anywhere around the Mediterranean with certainty exactly who is what and came from where and when. It really is. It's such a mashup over thousands of years. But eventually, they overthrow the Etruscans. Whether they do it, there's also another theory of what's known as the rape of, I want to say the rape of Lucretia. I don't have it in my notes, but that's another theory, which might actually be one of the more truthful ones, to where an Etruscan king's son actually rapes a Roman woman, and in response, the Romans rise up and overthrow the Etruscans. Seems like that one little, how would you say, the straw which broke the camel's back. Admittedly, rape is an atrocious, violent thing, but would one single rape be enough to cause an entire republic to rise up, an entire monarchy to be overthrown? It seems excessive. But maybe it was just a long history of abuses by the Etruscans who thought they could get away with whatever, absolute power, and the Romans finally had enough. Nonetheless, that's also another theory of what happened. We don't know for sure. All we know is in 509, that's the date we use to when the Romans officially took over Rome. The actual Roman people took over and founded a republic. They hated the monarchs. They hated the Etruscans. They certainly did. The Roman elite hated the monarchy because why do you think they hated them? Because they were the elite. They wanted to be the elite. Who's at the top of the pyramid? Who's at the top of this hierarchy, which, of course, the Etruscans? Well, the Roman elite, because, those rich and wealthy landowners and powerful Romans, we actually give a name to them, we'll talk about in a little bit, they wanted to be at the top. They want to be at the top of the ladder, so the only way they could do that is to get rid of the Etruscans, which they do eventually. They believed that power would corrupt, and they believed that there should be a large group of leaders, not just one royal family, which is what the Etruscans had. So they wanted a large group of wealthy people running society. They thought they'd be more fair. Well, it is. I mean, technically, the more people you have involved in government, usually the more fair and equitable it is. And the smaller group, the more authoritarian it is, and the worse it is. So, power became more distributed. We get, after the fall of the monarchy, we get hundreds, eventually thousands of elected positions. Still mostly in the hands of the rich, though. Certainly should understand that. So the first 250 years of the republic here see lots of strife. Between, this is really just the beginning of Roman society, really Roman dominance. to where you have the most aristocratic families, only about 130. That's how elite it was. You had about 130 families, which these had large extended families, so that could have been thousands of people. These were the patricians. And then the rest of the population, the other 99%, were the plebeians, the common people. All of these are citizens. These are all Roman peoples, but they're in the two different classes. The patricians are pretty much all your government officials. They own most of the land. They have most of the money, most of the power. They're the elite. They're the top 1%. And then everyone else is below them as the other 99. This conflict between the patricians and plebeians, which went on for decades, is referred to as the struggle of the orders. I have it on here. Good. Struggle of the orders. These were the two orders, the patricians and plebeians. And they were constantly working to where the patricians were trying to maintain order, keep the plebeians pacified, while the plebeians were constantly striving to improve their political, social, economic positions. The plebeians believed that 1% shouldn't have all the power, all the money, all the authority, all the status. It's funny. It actually mirrors a lot of what we have going on in American society today, to where almost all the wealth in this country is owned by the top 1%. And the question is, when's it going to happen? When is the other 99% going to finally force the 1% to really share the wealth with everyone else? And the Romans do it. The plebeians eventually do this, although it takes centuries for it to happen. The plebeians, one struggle or one strategy the plebeians used is they withheld military service. Many of the soldiers, many of the common warriors, soldiers, sailors were plebeians. They did a lot of the regular work. So they withheld their work until they were given concessions. One of those concessions is the 12 tablets. Do I have it on here? I do. The 12 tables. Sometime around 450 B.C.E., it's a list of law codes, initially written on stone tablets. 12 stone tablets. This was Rome's first written laws and a symbol of Roman commitment to justice for all citizens. All citizens, rich or poor. It was very significant. The highest political offices, though, were still typically only available to the patricians. And you had to hold multiple levels to actually rank up. It's almost like a video game. You had to hold this level to get access to the next level, to get access to the next level, to get access to the next level. And here's the deal. To get into the first level, to get a political office, usually required you to have status, money, a lot of free time. Many of these positions weren't paid. So how can you be a full-time politician if you're not paid unless you're wealthy? You can't. Because if you're a regular person, you need to be on the farm. You need to be working in your house, your job, your shop. You need to be working. You can't spend all your full time as a politician if you're not paid. Another reason many of these early positions were entirely held by the patricians, who had servants and slaves doing the work for them. The highest position was a consul. consul, a consul. That was the highest position as you worked up the rank. And consul positions were held for a year, and worked well. Eventually, the plebeians do get some changes made. They form a group of tribunes. Tribunes being 3, which tribunes were their own governmental body. It's really odd what we end up with. Ultimately, in Rome and during the Republic, we actually end up with 2 parallel governments, to where each one really represents one group. We have ones that represent the patricians and one that represent the plebeians. Each one represents the interests of their order. That's really what we end up with, believing that is the only way to make a fair government, to where we have certain groups that are only working for the benefit of their particular constituents, if you will. One really significant one is they actually get the rules made where eventually they split everything to where one of the consuls actually has to be a plebeian. So now we have 2 almost parallel governments where this one's focused on plebeians and this is focused on the patricians. It's really interesting. We see complex systems of assemblies that are created to where we have voted and appointed groups. Yeah. Still, poor common people had limited access, really limited access to this. The Romans develop a very complicated, sophisticated system of civil law over property, personal interests. And why is this so significant? The Roman legal system is the basis of our Western legal system. The Roman legal system is adopted by most European societies, and of course, the United States is formed out of European societies. And so what we find is that our law system in the U.S. is structured initially, if you want to go back to the period of the Revolution and the Constitution, our entire law system is structured on the Roman legal system, which at the time, for this time period, most time periods, actually, for most of world history, was the most complex and detailed legal system in the world, which did give lots and lots of rights to common people. Court rights, legal rights, ownership rights, property rights, rights to sue, lots and lots of rights. And they rewrite this system multiple times. They add to it, rewrite it, add to it, rewrite it. Again, we're talking about the whole, all Roman, over 2,000 years. So it's rewritten and changed and altered and added to and expanded upon and rewritten again multiple times. But ultimately, what does it give you? It gives you a society that is much more equitable than almost any place in the world. It's far from perfect. Again, they still have slaves. Women don't have rights. If you're really poor, you're just screwed. You just are. So it still is not a perfectly fair system, but there is no such thing as a perfectly fair system. But for all intents and purposes, it was probably the most fair legal system that existed at the time. Probably. I can't think of any other society that had a system that really had this type of equality for all citizens. Greeks tried this, but even in the Greeks, it really only applied to a few small city-states, like Athens, for instance. And even Athens, it only applied if you lived in the city. If you lived outside of the walls of the city, it didn't really apply to you. It really only applied if you were an actual inhabitant of the city of Athens. This law system, this code system, is amazing for its time period because it didn't apply just to the city of Rome. It didn't apply to the peninsula of Italy. Eventually, this law code system applies to the entire Roman Empire, which stretched from Europe, Asia, Africa, a massive empire. It applied to everybody, at least who was a citizen of Rome. This gives you the city of Rome during the Republic. The Forum was the government center. You see the Forum on here. That was the government center. The city was divided into 7 sections based upon these hills. The Palatine Hill, the Scalian Hill, the Aventine Hill. Because the original city of Rome was built on 7 hills. And each hill was actually your social status. You lived on different hills depending on your social status, depending on your job, who your patrons and clients were. All was based upon that, where you lived. And then eventually the walls are built to encompass all 7 hills because eventually all people who live in Rome are considered Roman citizens. So again, this is certainly another version of equity. Even though you're all on your individual areas, separated often by status or class or economic power, you're all still Roman, all within the walls. Eventually, Rome is surrounded by multiple walls. It becomes a heavily fortified city, which does not keep it safe. It's still attacked and burned and invaded and captured multiple times in its history. And here we have the actual Roman Forum as it stands today. There's which are probably most people are familiar with, the Colosseum. The Colosseum right back here, where the gladiator games were held. The Roman Forum is up here in the front. You can see it's ruins now. It's all ruins, as it is, of course. But still, imagine, this is something that's, thousands of years old, and a lot of it's still standing. Pieces of it are still standing. It's pretty impressive. Yeah. There's even some current evidence that indicates Rome may have actually been... There's even some evidence that indicates Rome might have actually existed earlier than we think. The city of Rome and the power of Rome might have actually been around 1 or even 200 years earlier than we have thought. Because there's some evidence that there are multiple levels. And the reason we didn't know this for so long is because they were so concerned about destroying what was still in existence. And the problem is, if you take a ruins and you start digging under it to see what's underneath the ruins, to see if there's older layers, you could damage the ruins above. It could collapse, it could fall, it could be destabilized. I mean, the stuff's thousands of years old. The columns could fall over. So there was a lot of hesitation as they would discover what is modern Rome to dig underneath. But as there has been more excavations, it does seem as though there might actually be underlayers, which would indicate that the city of Rome had actually existed for much longer than we think. That had actually been there for maybe centuries earlier, potentially. And they simply built on top of it. Not uncommon for ancient history. They did that all the time. Like the city of Troy. The city of Troy over in Asia Minor was built over probably 12 times. Now, it was not Rome, but still, it's not uncommon. And the reason this is simple. If people find what they think is a good settlement, it's got a good geographic location, it's easily defensible, good access to water or fields or whatever, people realize what's good. I mean, it's good. It's a good location. So they'll keep coming back to it. And they might get invaded, burned down, the city gets destroyed by some rampaging population of enemies. But then later on, years later, some people will stumble and be like, oh my God, this is a great location. And they'll just build right on top of it and start all over and start a brand new city. It happens. But still, pretty cool. I mean, it's pretty cool what still remains. Roman imperialism and its consequences. All right. Expansion in Italy, 500 to 220 BCE. The Romans defeated the Etruscans, and they conquered the Greeks, because the Greeks had multiple towns and communities along the coast. They defeat the Greeks, and by about 220 BCE, they pretty much control the entire peninsula. Now, that's just a drop in the bucket. That's actually a very small piece of land. Today, it's one country, Italy. Eventually, Rome will encompass an area of almost 50 countries, modern countries. So this is just a start. But by 220, they generally control most of the Italian peninsula. They sometimes enslaved defeated peoples and they took all their land. Sometimes they simply struck generous peace terms with them, people who had maybe been enemies. They formed alliances with them. Sometimes they would have agreements with local populations. They had to supply soldiers for Rome because Rome went to war every single year. It was seasonal. Rome, every single year, they had seasonal warfare. It was like clockwork. Once a year, every year, they'd send out armies to conquer some other population. It's kind of scary, really, in its methods. Every single year, the Romans sent armies out to expand their territory. It was what it meant to be Roman. Sometimes by force, sometimes by agreement, as long as people agreed to give military troops to Rome, give military aid. They would also get payments in kind. If they gave soldiers to Rome, they'd let the soldiers come back and bring treasure, or they would give them pieces of land. This, in turn, expanded Rome's population, expanded Rome's citizenry, and generally, joining Rome was beneficial because Rome was big, powerful, rich, had lots of money, lots of people. Therefore, joining Rome peacefully generally was beneficial to your society. Some people didn't, and sometimes the Romans had to burn down the cities. It was conquest. It was war. They pretty much got people to join them sometimes as criminals. Criminals are the wrong way to put it. It's almost like bribery. Hey, join us in war against that third country over there, that third city over there. Us and you together, we'll go conquer them and defeat them. And then when we do, we'll split up what they've got between you and us. And then forevermore, we'll be tied together and you'll be part of the Roman Republic. And Rome did this over and over and over. The Romans established colonies of relocated citizens all across the peninsula. They had a habit of doing this all through their history. They would take over a new territory, and then they would actually relocate Romans into that new territory to spread the culture and to spread the idea of what was to be Roman. And the idea was they will get quicker and easier to take over and assimilate a region if it's got thousands of Roman citizens immediately living there. You don't have to turn the population into Romans. They already are. At least a portion of them already are Roman. This also added the benefit of relieving pressure of the core of the empire. Again, it's still a republic, core of the republic. Because, of course, the greater Rome's population grew, there's more needs for food and supplies and representation, more poor, etc. So what they would do is they would just relocate entire communities 1,000 miles away into some place like in Spain or in France or in Greece, thereby leaving lots of room to expand in the Rome in the center of the empire. Conveniently enough, that also allowed the patricians to buy up more land and become wealthier. An interesting byproduct. Whether that was intended or not is actually debatable. You might think it's obvious. Oh, they did it on purpose. They wanted to take all the land. We're not sure that is actually the case, but it is. Oh, it happens many times. People are relocated, and then the wealthy come in and buy up the land and make bigger and bigger farms and estates, which certainly is a problem later in the Roman Empire. They also built roads everywhere they went. The largest road system in the world until modern times was the Romans. They built thousands, tens of thousands of miles. By the way, that's where we get the word mile. It's a Roman word referring to the length of distance of the Roman roads. That's where we get that. So they built thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of miles of road all across Afro-Eurasia. Easier transport of people, easier transport of goods for trade, and of course, easier transport of soldiers and supplies. So they could quickly react, invade, march, retreat, although Romans didn't retreat often. Latin became the language. One of the first regions the Romans conquer is Latium, which is right next to where the Romans came from, and they adopt their language. Again, this is what they do. So the Romans, we don't really know what the original Roman language was. Well, there is no Roman language that we know of. They adopt the language of Latin from the next door region of Latium. What the Romans originally spoke, we're really not sure. But this was not their original language. They adopt this replaces other languages, and eventually the language of Rome is Latin, at least for the Republic, during the Republic. This creates a more unified culture. Obviously, everybody speaks the same language, makes trade, communication, and culture a lot more connected. Lots of wealth, lots of power growing from this. Attracted many people to Rome. I mean, Rome became rich and wealthy. Money attracts people. It's like flies to honey. People took advantage of the amenities, the power of Rome. Rome's massive, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They had running fresh water due to the aqueducts. The aqueducts actually brought the water from the mountains into the cities. They had running water. They had a sewer system. They had toilets on the streets. Now they were open, where if you sit to take a dump, everyone could see you. But they still had public toilets. Almost no other early societies. We really don't see public toilets until modern times. Pretty interesting stuff. With all this new agriculture, this new lands from plunder and conquest, rich patricians and plebeians acquired great wealth, and we really get a large elite class of patricians and plebeians. We have many, many rich, wealthy plebeians as well. Money comes, by the end of the Republic, money comes to dominate. There's still two social classes, but the laws that we talked about a little while ago made the plebeians and the patricians so equitable that legally they were almost equal by the end of the Republic, which meant that with the law treating them fairly, that gave them access to new jobs, money, opportunities they never had before. They could hold on to their wealth. They could pass their wealth to their children, that kind of stuff. And so even though there's still different classes, we have a large group of rich people at the top who are both patricians and plebeians. So class comes to mean less due to the equality created by the uniform law system. But this didn't happen overnight. And again, we're talking about 500 years. It took 500 years for this law system to really work its way out. It still wasn't perfect, but to really make patricians and plebeians generally equal under the law. Therefore, all had access to wealth, status, and we see many plebeian families that are wealthier than patrician families. Quite interesting stuff. This gives you a little map here. It shows Rome, all roads lead to Rome. Genoa, Bologna. There's the island of Sicily. I don't know where else we need to see that. They had 60,000 miles of roads, more than the entire rest of the world combined in this time period. The entire rest of the world. Mile, we get that. And of course, the roads, what did they allow them to do? I sort of mentioned that. What do the roads allow the Romans to do? What are all the advantages of the roads? Here's an aqueduct. These massive structures that were built all across Afro-Eurasia, they were built in Asia, Africa, and Europe, had one purpose: just to transport water from the mountains and rivers down to the cities. Pretty amazing, honestly, because that's where your water is. It's up in the mountains. It's where the snow melt is. These massive structures to transport the water. The water would run up here at the top, up here in a little groove at the top, and it has like a 1% decline or a 0.5% or whatever, which meant it would just slowly run its way down to the cities. And these aqueducts, there's thousands of miles of these aqueducts, and it gets a modern picture. They still stand all across Afro-Eurasia. You can find images of these aqueducts that still stand. They are amazing construction projects, which allowed them to have running water, public fountains, public baths, sewer systems, running water in homes. Now, don't get me wrong, you probably had to be middle or upper class to have that. Not every common person would have running water in their apartments. And yes, Roman commoners in the cities lived in apartments, really small apartments, very prone to being caught on fire and destruction. Pretty crazy stuff. This was in France, 160 feet high, and this particular one here that you see in the picture here is 1,000 feet long. That's, a 1/5 of a mile long. Still standing today. This actually one brought water from 35 miles away to a Roman city. What does this architecture say about the Roman Empire? I mean, think about it. Think about the construction. Think about the engineering. Think about the workforce. What does this say that they built these things? They built thousands of miles of these things all across Africa, Europe, and Asia into the Roman Empire, into the Roman Republic. That they could do it, why they did it, what it said about the Romans, and also think about what it said to others. What did it say if you're just a common, uneducated person and you see these things and you see these structures and you think, wow, who has the power, the capability to build something like this? The organization, the transportation of supplies, materials, stone, the technical, mathematical, engineering know-how to do it, the money. It's just really, it's awe-inspiring, really, what they did to do some of these things. It's just pretty much is. All right. Next thing we'll shift gears is to our wars. We knew it had to come pretty soon. So wars with Carthage and the East, 264 to 121. Carthage, this is situated on northern Africa. The city of Carthage on northern Africa. It actually becomes an empire itself. Their trade routes, their fertile agricultural lands made it an enticing prize for the Romans. The Romans wanted, Carthage was wealthy. They had lots of great lands, lots of cities, communities all across the Mediterranean. It also, though, made them a dangerous rival because Carthage was an expanding empire as well. And oftentimes the Romans, after they left Italy, after they started expanding out of Italy, the Carthaginians and the Romans started to run into each other. They often found places, they wanted to colonize the same places, they wanted to control trade routes, and ultimately, it ends up to where the Mediterranean is simply not big enough for two empires. War was inevitable. We call these the Punic Wars. There were three of them. 264 to 41, 218 to 201, and 149 to 146. So a period of, 120 years? We have three different wars with Carthage, between Rome and the Carthaginian Empire. Rome won all of these. What did it prove? It proved Rome's willingness to sacrifice lives. We don't know how many soldiers died in this, but we're sure it numbered in the thousands or hundreds of thousands. Rome's willingness to sacrifice lives, to expend huge sums of money. During these wars, it was probably the greatest expense of the Roman Republic. This is still the Republic fighting here. And fight for as long as necessary to win. Again, this war lasted 23 years. So Rome was never willing to give up. Even when they lost entire armies, they would simply get together a new army and come back the next season and do it again. And if they lost next year, they would come back next time. This is one of the things that made Rome so successful. They never gave up. Literally, once they set their eyes on a target, they threw money and men at it until they conquered it. No matter how many lives it cost or how much money it cost. They never stopped. Once Rome had set sights upon you, your city-state, your country, your population, it was over already. It was just a matter of how long it took for you to realize it was over. This is the way it was with Carthage. Ultimately, it's thought that maybe as many as 500,000 people died on both sides. Let me say a total. 500,000 people died between Carthage and Rome over this war, which lasted 120 years. These are just the major conflicts. The entire time, they would fight, they would have skirmishes, they would fight over individual colonies, individual towns, communities, trade routes. So even in between the years, Rome and Carthage were still competing with each other, still trying to kill off each other, still trying to take territory from each other. This was a significant chunk of the population at the time. A huge chunk of the population. Rome probably had, maybe in this time period, upwards of possibly 20 million people. Maybe 20 million people. So losing 500,000 people, that is 10% would be 2, 3, 4% of your entire population? That's amazing. That's just a lot of people. That's a lot of fathers and sons and brothers and husbands that are not ever coming home because these wars were fought by men. This was probably the most large expenditure of the Roman Republic for most of these time period. Carthage had to be defeated. Romans said Carthage had to go down. They saw them as a competitor and a challenger in the Mediterranean. Everywhere the Romans went, the Carthaginians were usually there first. Carthage had expanded across the Mediterranean long before the Romans. Centuries before the Romans. Carthage had already conquered half of the Mediterranean while the Romans were still fighting in central Italy. So Carthage seemed to have all the advantages. They were there first. They had a much bigger territory. Yeah. Had Carthage ever really taken Rome seriously early and really did a full-scale invasion and been willing to throw as many lives and money at it as the Romans, maybe they would have defeated them. But they weren't willing to do that. The First Punic War, where the Romans learned how to do naval warfare, and they didn't know about naval warfare, so what the Romans did, they couldn't really fight with ships. What they would do is they'd actually run right up into the Carthaginian ships, and then the Roman soldiers, that's where Rome excelled, was their soldiers, would jump onto the other ship and then kill everybody. So they didn't really know anything about naval warfare. All they knew is how to build these ships. They would get close to the Carthaginians, board the Carthaginian ship, and kill everybody and take over the ship. But they didn't really know how to fight ship-to-ship combat. But they knew how to fight with soldiers. So one of those things that if the Roman ship got close, you were lost. They would defeat you. They took over Sicily. This was their first foreign territory. That's a little island off the southern coast of Italy. So this was their first foreign territory that they really conquered outside of Italy. They took over. They started taxing, and this really gave them it emboldened them to conquer Sardinia and Corsica and start conquering other islands in the Caribbean. Pardon me, not Caribbean, Mediterranean. Conquer other islands in the Mediterranean, realizing that they could do this. They could be successful, and they could generate a lot of wealth from these islands, because these islands were isolated. So they had many years and centuries to build up, to have treasure, to have wealth, to have status. No one had ever really conquered them before. So when the Romans got there, they found treasuries full of money. They found food supplies, storehouses full of grain and wine and everything. They was like busting open a treasure chest every time they took one of these islands. And they used that money and wealth to simply fuel the next war, the next conflict, the next invasion. And it was how it worked. They would use this year's victories to pay for next year's wars. And they would do that year after year after year. Of course, if you think logically, what does that mean? If you ever have years without victories, you can maybe get by on one or two. But if you have successive years without victories, you can't pay for the next year's wars again. As long as you keep expanding, this is really what an empire does. As long as you keep growing, getting more treasure, more status, more land, more wealth, you can then continue to fuel the machine of war. But as soon as you get stopped, as soon as you get pushed back, you can get by with a minor defeat, have a year or two where it doesn't work. But if you have successive year after year after year of losses and defeats, and you can't replenish your resources and your stockpiles and your treasure and your money, you will eventually collapse. That's eventually what happens to Rome, much in the future. But for most of their history, they were able to constantly keep moving, expanding, and conquering every single year, being able to fuel the next year's wars, the next year's conquests. Following this victory, Rome issued an ultimatum to Carthage, telling Carthage could no longer expand in the Mediterranean, and if Carthage expanded into the Mediterranean, Rome would have to take action. Well, Carthage kept going. Carthage even invaded. They sent over their general Hannibal. Do I even have it on here? They sent over their general Hannibal. This is the Second Punic War. Hannibal actually marched an entire army from northern Africa over to the Strait of Gibraltar, crossed the strait, marched across all of Europe into Italy. Took years, probably. He took war elephants from northern Africa into central Italy. He rampaged across Italy for the better part of 15 years. But you know what he never did? He never conquered the city of Rome. He was never able to take Rome. Meanwhile, while he was doing this, the Romans actually just sailed right across the ocean and attacked Carthage and attacked the cities in Carthage. So while Hannibal and his armies are rampaging across Europe and Italy, destroying farmland, doing lots of damage, the Romans were able to take their attack directly to the Carthaginians. They ravaged northern Africa, and they won. Hannibal gets called back. Hannibal has to come back. The great hero of this war was Scipio Africanus, probably given that surname Africanus as his victories in Africa. Scipio Africanus was the one that really forced Hannibal to return, and by that point the war was over and Rome won this as well. Even though Rome actually probably took the greatest amount of damage, as I said, they didn't care. Death toll, damage, destruction didn't matter. Next year they would come at you harder, faster, with more soldiers. The Roman Senate imposes heavy fines and penalties on Carthage, takes their territory in Spain, and takes big chunks of the Carthage's empire. There's peace for half a century. For about 50 years there's peace, but then in the mid-100s, Rome attacks the king of the region of Numidia. I'm not even exactly sure where this is. Numidia was a friend or ally of Carthage, so Carthage once again decides it must come to the defense of an ally and go against Rome, This time Rome had enough. You can see how long this war lasted. 3 years. Rome, by this point in time, when the first war started, Punic War, Carthage was bigger, more powerful, stronger than Rome. Had they really thrown everything at them at that point, history might be different. They might have defeated the Romans, had they really just thrown everything at them at the beginning. But by the Second and Third Punic Wars, Rome had grown bigger and stronger. And by the Third Punic War, Rome had already conquered parts of Europe. They conquered much of the Mediterranean. They were starting to move into the territory of Greece. Rome was simply way too powerful, and Carthage stood no chance in the Third Punic War. Romans actually burned the entire city of Carthage to the ground, destroyed it, and seized its empire. Carthage ceased to exist as an empire. Romans absorbed it, destroyed it, burned it down, and enslaved many of its population. By this point in time, the mid-100s, Rome now controls basically 2/3 of the entire Mediterranean. As a result of these wars with Carthage, Rome had added Spain, Central Europe, Greece, parts of Asia Minor, Northern Africa, and just in the Carthaginian Punic War time, they had actually tripled in size. One of the reasons Greece was conquered by violence and not alliance was the fact that the Greeks actually allied themselves with the Carthaginians. They tried to join with the Carthaginians, hoping to stop the Romans. Didn't work out. So Romans pretty much conquered by force most of Greece. Lots of bloodshed, lots of death. The Roman Empire was glorious in many of its achievements. Science, architecture, culture, many things. But they were bloody, vicious conquerors. They wreaked paths of destruction and violence everywhere they went. This is the nature of empire. The United States has done the same thing. We have wreaked, is that the right word? I don't know. Carved paths of destruction and violence everywhere that we have expanded our empire. It's no different. It doesn't change. Empire is a violent, destructive, brutal thing. And the Romans did this. We still do it today. Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on. See what we got going on here. So 500 BCE is when they conquered Latium, right here. By 264, they controlled Italy. That's the beginning of the First Punic War. 241, they added some other territories. Yeah, it's not actually on there. I guess it's this here, maybe? And then by the end of the Second Punic War, they added this yellow area. This was what they actually got from Carthage at the end of the Second Punic War. Into the Fourth Punic War, they added parts up here. They added Greece. They added Carthage. Again, they conquered Carthage right here. Territory added in Asia Minor is this light green area here. This is what we used to call with the Greeks the Ionia. This is where the city of Troy is and other cities. By 44 BC, they controlled all of this green area. That was the end of the Republic, really. The death of Julius Caesar was the end of the Republic. Although he wasn't really a Republican. He was an emperor. But the Republic falls with the end of Julius Caesar. So yeah, just in the period of Carthage, from the orange to the brown, they added all of this, pretty much everything here they added, except for the dark green. So all the rest of this was added during their time with Carthage. At the time they went to war with Carthage, Carthage controlled this, and much of this. They were allies with these other regions. So when they first started with Carthage, they really only controlled this part of the peninsula. You know, hindsight's 20/20. If the Carthaginians had done more early on, they might have actually stopped the Romans. Or maybe not. Who knows? But by the Second and Third Punic Wars, there was simply no stopping the Romans. Carthage didn't stand a chance. All right, Civil War and the destruction of the Republic. We'll start with the Gracchus brothers, Tiberius and Gaius. Violence in politics, 133 to 121. Remember, this is still the Republic. The Republic still goes to about 44 BCE. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, they tried to use their power as tribunes. Remember, the tribunes are the plebeians. So these were wealthy, powerful plebeians. They tried to use their power as tribunes to help farmers, to help the working class. Some members of the elite really considered their personal interests more important, and they resort to murder. And eventually, these brothers are murdered. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but eventually they're both murdered for trying to stand up for the common people. Imagine, in our government today, if people in Washington just started killing each other on the floor of the Senate or the floor of the House of Representatives. Pardon me. That's what this is. It became so chaotic that they start actually assassinating tribunes and senators in the public. Like on the streets of the Forum and in the streets of Rome, they would just kill them. That's how crazy it had gotten, and how much people were willing to fight over and kill over power. Ultimately, this really creates what we would consider two political factions. Factions are bad. Hey, guess what? We have two major political factions in our country today. Factionism is bad. Factionalism is bad. It's never good for the country. And that's what we have now. So they create these two factions that eventually bring down the Republic. Now, they weren't in different factions. They were together. One, and then he's killed, and then the other brother takes up the mantle and tries to follow in his brother's footsteps until they kill him too. So the upper class Gaius brothers, they were plebeians. They asked the rich to give money to the poor, to aid the poor, to help building construction for the poor, to give food to the poor. Now, they're going to do this by giving land from conquered territories. And this land was going to provide food, and this food would then be given to the poor. Rome had lots and lots of poor, lots and lots of people living in poverty. The Roman Empire had 1 million slaves. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. So that was just 1 million slaves. This empire was massive. By the end of the Roman Empire, its population was probably over 100 million, which for this time period was probably only rivaled by China, maybe. China probably had about the same population, close to it. That's the only place in the world that had that kind of population. Well, they wanted to give this land to the poor or use the food to provide for the poor. They thought it would strengthen the entire empire, or the entire republic. Pardon me, again, it's a republic. They thought it would do that. Tiberius was elected as a tribune in 33. His opponents blocked his attempts to do all of this. Tiberius overrode the Senate by actually having a plebeian assembly pass the laws. Remember, they have two separate systems, so the plebeians go ahead and pass laws. They give land to the poor, give food to the poor, to landless Romans. These are Roman citizens that simply don't have land. Tiberius went against this Roman tradition. He ran for re-election as a tribune. He then got re-elected multiple times, which wasn't allowed. Actually, you weren't supposed to be re-elected multiple times. This violates the laws, but they do it anyway, because the plebeians think that they operate on their own set of laws versus the patrician law system. Well, many people disagree to this, and they actually corner him in the Senate, and in the middle of the Senate, they beat him to death, right on the Senate floor. Not only him, they go ahead and execute and murder a bunch of his followers and other plebeian politicians. Yeah. That tells you we're in trouble. When politicians are publicly murdering other politicians in the streets, or literally in the House, on the floor of the Senate. Yeah, it gets bad. Now, this happens to Tiberius. Well, Gaius, who is his brother, he then follows in his brother's footsteps. He becomes a tribune 10 years later. He pushed to pay for food and grain for the poor, to reduce grain prices, to get more farmland specifically designated to feed poor and lower class people, to give land to the poor. He also pushes public money to fund public work projects, to make public baths and public parks. All this kind of stuff that he thinks is necessary. Don't get me wrong, it's also self-serving. If he did do all these things, of course, that gets him popularity. He gets reelected. He was a politician. Even if politicians, even today, even if a politician does something that is good for the people, they're also doing it because it props up their own career, their own legacy, their own image. No matter what a politician does, there's always an an ulterior motive. There always is. Nonetheless, he does this. He also proposes that courts actually start trying patrician senators for corruption. He starts to go after the patrician senators in their government. He then creates a new class of people known as the equites. It's a whole new order. Patrician plebeians in a new order. And these equites are the equestrian class, which are basically the wealthy business people. We'd have a term today called the nouveau riche. They're not from wealthy families. They're not from plebeian families. Patrician, plebeian, they're in essence people who've worked their way from the bottom up, and they are wealthy business people, merchants. This new equite class, the equestrian class. And he tries to befriend the equestrian class. The Senate counters this by authoring consuls to use force to defend the republic. So now we are using the Roman military being controlled by one class of Roman population, the patricians and the senators, against another class of Roman peoples, the plebeians and the equestrians. And they have to maintain order no matter what to defend the republic. And they go and murder him. They attack him, murder him, kill his followers. Both brothers murdered, killed for trying to... How did the patricians see it ultimately? The plebeians are trying to take wealth and status from them and give it to the common people. In other words, it's okay when it's down on paper, or whatever the Romans wrote on. Scrolls, paper, papyrus, I don't know what the hell they wrote on. Sheepskin, I don't know. It's okay to have it written down, to have the law codes written down, that on paper everybody's equal. But when it really comes down to it, and you really want to start taking from the rich and give to the poor, no, that shit's not going to fly. You can say all day long the different classes are equal, the different classes have opportunities, everyone can rise up the social ladder, and this did apply to a lot of people. But if you really want to take away the status and power of the patricians and start giving away wealth and status to the commoners, that's simply a step too far. Patricians were unwilling to give up their status, power, and wealth, and they were willing to kill for it, and they make war on the others. Basically, they create a civil war between the classes, between the different orders. So Gaius is killed, hundreds of his followers are killed. I actually think Gaius committed suicide, actually. I think. But he was going to be killed. If he hadn't committed suicide, they were going to kill him. Yeah. These violent deaths made murder a political tactic. Yes, it now became standard practice that if you really bucked tradition and you really challenged other politicians, that they would simply send a kill squad after you and kill you. Great place to be a politician. Yes, this became an actual political tactic that was used for any politician that strayed outside the bubble. There was this bubble of acceptable behavior which tried to keep the status quo. Rich stayed rich, commoners stayed commoners. On the law, everyone's equal, but yet in reality, you have the 1% and the 99, really. And as long as you stayed within this bubble of acceptable behavior, to where you could do a little bit of reform, you could give a little bit of food to the poor, but as long as you didn't really ever truly threaten the wealth of the rich, you were safe. But as soon as you strayed outside those lines and actually truly challenged the wealth and the power of the wealthy, they were going to send somebody after you and kill you. And it happened dozens of times. Yeah. This really creates this factional government to where everybody seems to fall in with the populares or the optimates. The populares were the supporters of the people, mostly in line with the plebeians, and the elitists were the optimates, which translates as the best, which were generally supported by the patricians. So we had 200 years here from the 12 tablets, which was the 400s, into the 200s, where we had 2 centuries of generally equitable treatment between the rich and the poor. But as Rome grew bigger and bigger and bigger, its territory is now far, far surpassing what it was at the time of the 12 tables. Probably 10 times bigger. So much wealth has been generated, so much power. The rich are simply unwilling to give it up. And they're willing to kill for it. Many of these powerful patricians actually have private armies. Hundreds of soldiers that work just for them. Think like rich wealth people have like private security, but hundreds of soldiers that are just on the pay. That's how wealthy these guys were. Some of these patricians became so powerful that they had their own independent armies. Still, I mean, it doesn't compare to the Roman army. The Roman army had tens and tens of thousands. But still, if you have so much money that you can actually fund your own little private military, you got way too much money and power and status. Way too much. These factions persist, they continue to create friction, and eventually this factionalism is what really brings down the Republic. Now we move to Marius and the origin of client armies. This leads us into what I was just talking about, these personal armies. So the Republic was constantly looking for new military leaders, new innovative commanders, new strategies, because they had to 100% of the time deal with slave revolts, foreign invasions. Rome's border was now tens of thousands of miles long. They were constantly dealing with foreign powers. They were surrounded 360 degrees, literally full circle. Europe, Asia, Africa. They were surrounded every direction by enemies. Because everyone by this point in time knew who Rome was. You were either an ally or an enemy of Rome. There really was no middle ground. You were either with them or against them. So some people chose to be against them. So they had to constantly look for new leaders, new power, new training, and a new kind of leader emerges in this first, second century to sort of respond to all this disarray, this chaos, this civil strife, this constant military threat, sometimes referred to as a new man, the new man leader. Typically upper class, typically who had not had high-level politicians in his family. There'd never been a consul in his family, for instance. So he'd never had high status. He might have money, but the highest status in Rome was only political position. That was your highest, no matter how wealthy you were not a true high-status citizen unless you'd been a consul or a tribune, unless you'd held the highest offices. So these are people that probably didn't ever hold those positions, even if they had money. They relied on fame, fortune, and the ability to lead to really become powerful. They gathered clients. I sort of mentioned this client system before. They gathered people who were willing to support them, help them, give them money and power. And like today, like politicians, when they run elections, we regular people and wealthy donors give them millions. Tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. These politicians don't use their own money to run political campaigns. Political campaigns are run 99% on donations. 99% is donations. So that's where they get the money, from people giving the money to them. And so he starts building up this big client base. One of these first new man leaders is Gaius Marius. 157 to 86, so he lived a pretty good lifetime. What is that, about 71 years or so? What are you doing over there? Sorry, my dog is, okay. Don't know what she was doing. Anyway, so he capitalized those military achievements to an unprecedented 6 terms as consul. And I believe consul was a 1-year job. So 6 terms as consul, no one ever done it before. You weren't supposed to do it. Again, as a consul, you really weren't supposed to keep doing it. You're supposed to be a consul, serve Rome, and then step down and go back to your regular life. Marius was opposed to the optimates. He was one of the populares. They saw him as an outsider. They saw him as a threat. Most of his support came from the common people, the populares. He had won over with his reform for entrance requirements to the army. What? He had changed it so that almost anyone could join the military, including plebeians, lots of common people. He made it almost open. Further, he had done something else unheard of. He starts giving rewards to his soldiers, not just pay, not just your salary, but when they conquered new territories, he would actually take the land and give it to the soldiers, which was very unusual, because typically the land that was conquered became part of the Roman Empire, Republic, or was controlled by wealthy families. So he was actually giving this land that they would conquer to his men, to the soldiers. These soldiers became what we called client armies. He really created the first client army. What is the difference here? This army was beholden to Marius, Gaius Marius, not to Rome. These soldiers, even though they're technically Roman soldiers, owned, well, I don't know if you want to say, if you've been, I was in the military, you almost say, you're owned, owned by the military, owned by the government. But these were Roman soldiers that worked for the Roman Republic, but the only one they really cared about was Gaius Marius. They did his bidding, even if what he ordered was contrary to what the Senate, and the Senate are the ones that are really running Rome, contrary to what the Senate ordered. That made these armies different. These armies respected Gaius Marius. They trusted him. He gave them wealth and status and brought in lots of people who were soldiers, because being a soldier was a point and a way of elevating your status. You could become a commoner, or you could be born a commoner and actually end your life with wealth and status and nice land as a soldier. Because of these new ways they were running the military, they would conquer the land and give the land to the soldiers. So this really creates something interesting. It is not good for the health of the Republic. When you're giving all the land that you're being conquered out to regular people, you're basically bribing the soldiers to come and fight for you. And the soldiers aren't loyal to the country. They're loyal to the general. Very problematic. Loyalty should not be to our leaders. Loyalty should be to the country, to the Republic. Should be that way. Anyway, considered very threatening. His military reforms often open up the ranks to the proletarians, which is another rank, another order of people who had no property. They couldn't afford weapons. He gave them this treasure, this wealth, this status. It basically allowed non-citizens, regular people, common poor farmers to now go and gain status and wealth. And they became loyal to Gaius Marius. Well, other commanders started doing the same thing. They all started to see other client armies, other generals, and many who advanced their political career through the use of these clients. And the disintegration of the Republic continues. Because now we have more and more people in the Republic that are not in any way loyal to Rome. Rome doesn't even matter anymore. It's simply about their own personal interests and their interests of their leaders, their generals. So reforms, consequences, proletarians. All right. Let's look at Sulla and the beginning of the civil wars. So in the early 1st century B.C.E., Rome rejects its Italian allies' demands for citizenship, and we see the beginning of a 4-year-long social war. This is when many allies, many subordinate states, many outlying regions, sometimes commonly called the provinces, think like Spain or Germany, places like this, referred to as Germania. Think about these regions, the Greek regions, Macedonia, stuff like this. Many of these places expected to be citizens when they were joining the Roman Empire, because some did join voluntarily. and they wanted to be citizens. Well, Rome rejected this. The Senate rejected much of this because the Senate, again, wanted to hold on to status and power and not disseminate all this status and power to others. The Roman army won this bloody social war against a group of Italian allies. The Romans granted the citizenship eventually after a bloody war, and most freeborn people were now able to vote in the Roman assemblies. Prior to this, you really had to live in and around Rome to have any say in government. Now, it made it more open to where anyone in Italy, could potentially vote or participate in Roman politics. But still, was still limited to only the rich and the wealthy, really. Now, the success of General Lucius Cornelius Sulla in the social war won him election as a consul. So he became a consul, the highest position in government, in 88 B.C.E. In the same year, he was also granted command of an entire army, and he was to go attack a king in Asia Minor. He was supposed to go to the king, conquer the king, and this was actually a region that was actually already under the Roman control and had revolted and broken loose. This happened a lot. So Sulla wins this prestigious position due to his success in the social war, which did actually benefit many Italian peoples who got to be more involved in Roman politics. He goes to attack in Asia Minor. His rival, Gaius Marius, the first client general we just talked about, he has command. He actually has the entire command given to himself. He steals the command. Why does this matter? The highest levels of status in Rome was as a conquering general and a consul. So when he does this, in essence, he strips status. He strips position away from Sulla. He insults him, and it is the highest levels of insult. You can't be any worse than this. Having your army stolen from you, having your political office stolen from you, at least that's the way Sulla saw it. Gaius Marius was able to do this. All right. Furious, Sulla actually marches his army, first time to do it. He takes his army, his client army, and marches on Rome. He actually marches on the city of Rome with his client army. Because his army, even though the army was supposedly, and the authority was given over to Gaius Marius, Sulla's client army they respect him, they follow him, instead of following Rome. So they agree, and they follow his orders when he orders the Roman army to turn around and march on Rome. That would have been unheard of in previous times. Nothing like this has ever happened. An outrage against all Roman values and the entire Roman way of life. All right. Many of his officers actually deserted Sulla, but his soldiers, the core of his army, actually followed him. He captures Rome. He captures the capital of Rome. Sulla's eventually killed all of his enemies, exiles, or kills all of them. He rampages through the city, taking wealth and treasure from Rome, putting into his own personal bank account, bank accounts, but his own personal treasure, his own personal estates, paying off his soldiers. And then he goes on to march to Asia Minor and defeat that king. He pillaged and looted all across Asia Minor. While he did this, Marius and his soldiers, who are now free to act because Sulla has left and gone to Asia Minor, Marius and his soldiers start to rampage and create a reign of terror in Rome and try to take over Rome and try to take everything they want. It's knuck and futz is what it is. It is. It literally is if today suddenly 4-star generals took entire parts of the army and just started marching on Washington, D.C., and they started fighting wars. If something like that happened in our society today, we would all say the same thing. It's the end. We're done. It's the end of our country. Our country has fallen. Well, the Republic does fall as a result of this. In 83, Sulla returns. And now we have an all-out war between Sulla and his soldiers, his armies, Gaius and his armies. Oh, and there's other generals. These aren't the only two. There's others. We have multiple rampaging armies across central Italy, all vying for the wealth, the status, and the power and control. All believing they represent what's best for Rome, which is ridiculous. Sulla even goes so far as to create a hit list. He actually creates a list of all of his enemies and disseminates it publicly and says, these people need to be executed and killed, all of them. It's a list with hundreds of names. Politicians, senators, plebeians, patricians, tribunes, generals, officers, senators, anyone and everyone who challenges what Sulla wants, believes should be executed. Yeah, it's really insane. The Senate, to appease Sulla, believing Sulla is simply too powerful and too strong. Oh, and by the way, he has many of the people on his side because he is a conquering general. He comes back after defeating a major enemy in Asia Minor. He brings treasure and wealth with him. He hands out food and treasure to the poor, the common people. He gets the people in the streets of Rome on his side, actually. The Senate realizes they only have two options. Do everything they can to appease Sulla, or he's going to execute them. Maybe execute the entire Senate. Kill everybody. He could have. They give him emergency powers. They declare him a dictator. He's given this permanently, a permanent position. Dictator is only something that should be for 6 months. It's actually an official position, but it's only in the utmost times of war and invasion when there's actually an enemy at the doorstep. Well, the enemy, ironically, was Sulla himself. They give him the power of dictator. He uses the position to reorganize the entire government and hold on to all status and wealth for his wealthy friends. Takes over private property, huge farms, gives all this treasure and wealth to his soldiers because he had to keep the soldiers on his side. He had to keep the army, his client army, loyal to him. His bloody career and the bloody rampages and the civil wars that are engaged with Gaius Marius and Sulla and dozens of other generals and political leaders, it really underscores what Rome has become in this time period. This is not isolated incident. This same type of incident occurs over and over a 100-year period. Dozens of these. Conflicts, civil wars, client armies, generals, Roman armies literally marching against Roman armies. Fighting each other to the death. All over power, status, wealth. And every one of them claiming the same thing. We're here to protect the Republic. We're here to protect Rome. We're here to stand up for the citizens. Yeah. All of this really served to acquire fortunes rather than defend Rome. This patron-client system led these soldiers to have only loyalty to the generals. The ambitious desired power and wealth for their own sake, and it overshadowed any concern for the actual Roman Republic. Personal interests far outweighing interests of the people. It's a disaster, and it lasts altogether close to a century, from the early 100s to the mid 40s and 50s. It's pretty crazy. Well, this takes us to Julius Caesar, most people are familiar with. This is the collapse of the Republic. It was still together, amazingly enough. Amazingly enough, it hadn't already fallen apart. Somehow they're still holding it together. So after the reign of Sulla, other powerful military generals dominate the final years of the Republic, often ruthlessly pursuing their own advancement while publicly declaring their loyalty to the city, their loyalty to the Republic, while personally and privately all they cared about was power and wealth and their own distorted view of how they were the best ruler, how they would be the one to save the Republic. Gnaeus Pompey was one from 106 to 48 B.C.E. That was his life, his career. He won victories to support Sulla when he was a junior general. He actually supported Sulla. He was one of the generals with his own army that helped Sulla. He did this in his 20s. He achieved lots of success. And after Sulla's death, he rises to power. Pompey becomes powerful and wealthy and has his own large client army. In 71 BCE, Pompey actually seizes glory. He defeats a massive slave rebellion by someone you might have heard of, Spartacus. This happens around 71 BCE. It's the largest slave revolt in Roman history. I think it was, don't quote me on this, but I think it was like 200,000 slave revolt. It was massive. 200,000, 60,000, something like that. Anyway, they put it down. They defeat it. I mean, the slaves didn't stand a chance. They were untrained, unarmed, against what was probably the best trained, most capable military at the time, outside of maybe China. And so they put down this, and of course he gets massive glory and honor for this, putting down and defeating this rebellion. He's elected to the position of consul. He gains tremendous popularity. He then goes out and takes over a naval fleet. He eliminates pirates. So he was a land general. He was a naval admiral. An incredible career. He was undoubtedly a brilliant military mind. Undoubtedly. He never was defeated. He was undoubtedly a brilliant strategic military mind. He used that in his politics to gain political power as well. Using the strategic skills he learned as a soldier and a general, he applied it to politics. Logical, I suppose. He gets lots of popularity, defeating the pirates. He brings lots of food supplies back to the Roman people. He expands the territory. He conquers the region of Syria. The region of Syria is in the Middle East. He conquers that region and adds it to the Roman territories, a new province, the province of Syria. Now, Pompey endangered his position, however, he ignored the consul. He ignored the Senate. The Senate were the governing body. The Senate was the government, really, even if they were ignored by the generals. Well, Pompey ignored the Senate. He ignored how he was supposed to govern and administer these new territories. He gave land to his soldiers. He defied the Senate, or simply didn't consult the Senate. He didn't care. He had so much power and status and this huge army that, did everything he said. He had no one to fear. Now, Pompey's enemies in Rome do actually start to go after him. They try to undermine him. They proclaim that he is an inadequate leader, an inadequate consul, that his campaigns abroad, fighting wars abroad, means he's ignoring the people of Rome. They try to make him look bad to do this. Pompey responds by forming an alliance with two other generals who had been actually rivals before. These other generals are Crassus and Julius Caesar. So he forms what is known as the First Triumvirate. Obviously, it's the first, meaning there's going to be more. Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, who had all been enemies before, all with client armies. Now they join together briefly to show their power and authority. This alliance was cemented as well by the marriage. Caesar's daughter, Julia, actually marries Pompey. Now, she's much younger, and it was a marriage of convenience. It was an arranged marriage. It was a political marriage to bring these two, what had been enemies, together as allies by marriage, by blood, sort of. All right, 1 year later, Caesar wins election as a consul. Caesar begins to build his own army in Gaul, which is, I guess, what would be modern-day France. He starts to build his own army, and he starts to go out, and Caesar conquers Gaul, which is modern-day France and parts of Germany and probably other countries. Caesar's military prowess and success, he plunders central and northern Gaul, which is basically Central Europe. He defeats many enemies, defeats many tribes. He wins great devotion. He gives land and treasure and women and everything to his men. This created lots of political enemies in Rome, because Caesar was now the most popular man in Rome, with a big army at his back, and lots of poor people, because one of the things Caesar did, which was very smart, as far as becoming, a dictator or whatever. It's a very smart tactic. He shipped lots and lots of food supplies back to Rome to feed the poor, to feed the masses, to feed the commoners, to feed the slaves. He was very popular among the people. I don't know if he ascribed to the populares of the optimates, but he would have been effectively a populares, very popular with the common people. Feed the poor. Romans did this all the time. They had a name for it. It was called bread and circuses. They actually called it that. If you feed the poor and you entertain them, you control Rome. Because the poor and the commoner are the vast majority of the Roman population. So feed the poor, entertain the poor, keep their mind off of the fact they're poor, and keep them from starving, and you can do whatever you want. Well, Caesar does this. Many people in government fear this. They fear he's going to show back up at the gates of Rome, declaring himself leader, dictator, conqueror, something like that. They really feared it. Crassus goes into war somewhere else and he dies. He actually gets killed in battle, I think. So Crassus is now dead. Caesar's daughter also dies. So Julia, who'd been married to Pompey, dies. So the first triumvirate collapses. Crassus is dead. And then Caesar's daughter dies in childbirth, so his connection with Pompey is now dead. He has no reason to be loyal to Pompey now because the only thing connecting him was their marriage of his daughter to Pompey, and now the daughter's dead. So this alliance between Caesar and Pompey fractures. Crassus is gone. So really it's just two men with two big armies, both of them wanting the highest status and position and power. And they go to war with each other. So they form the triumvirate to pretty much take over and consolidate their power in Rome. And of course, when there's just two left standing, they choose to go at each other's throats. Caesar leads his army against Rome after Pompey is appointed consul. Only it's unusual. There were always two consuls. It was always supposed to be even power split. Pompey is appointed sole consul, the only consul, which means effectively Pompey is now the leader of the entire Roman Republic. One guy at the top. Caesar has a problem with this. Caesar sends his armies into Rome. He invades Rome. Pompey has to flee the city because he simply believes he can't defeat Caesar and his big army with all of their status and their power and all the support of the commoners. Most of the senators flee Rome. Caesar's army follows Pompey into Spain. He then follows Pompey into Greece and eventually defeats Pompey in 48 B.C.E. Chases him around the entire Roman Republic, from continent to continent. Eventually tracking him down and defeating his army. This lasted years. This took years for this to play out. And now there is only one. Crassus has died. Pompey is now dead at the hands of Caesar and his armies. Pompey actually flees to Egypt, and he's murdered by the Egyptian government. My apologies. He's actually murdered by the Egyptians. His army's defeated by Caesar. Why did the Egyptians murder Pompey? They did it on purpose. They purposefully assassinated him because they didn't want Caesar to come down after them. They were afraid of the Romans invading Egypt. They didn't want this. Well, yeah, didn't work out so well, unfortunately. So they actually assassinate Pompey, probably hoping to make Caesar happy. So after defeating all the final holdouts from the Civil War, Caesar takes over, and he names himself the sole consul. The exact thing he was criticizing Pompey for doing, he does. He becomes the sole leader, and eventually is actually named dictator of Rome by the Senate. And of course the senators probably did this because they were afraid if they didn't give him all these powers, he was just going to have them all killed. Which he could have done. He established all kinds of policies that make him really popular to common people, all kinds of new laws, giving food to the poor, and the whole bread and circuses we talked about. Really, really people like him, common people, But the senators, who still have most of the wealth and money, they don't. So what do? On March 15th in 44 BCE, they stab him to death on the floor of the Senate. They all get together, they all grab daggers, and they stab him to death right there on the floor. The great dictator, just murder him right there on the floor of the Senate. March 15th in 44, we have a name for it today. We call it the Ides of March. That is March 15th of every year. His murderers saw themselves as liberators. They saw themselves as revolutionaries, liberating the republic from a dictator. Well, the common people were furious about this. The majority of Roman population weren't happy. Many senators were actually killed or driven out of Rome for what they did, believing they had just killed the hero of Rome. Because remember, Caesar had given massive amounts of wealth and food and treasure to the common, regular people, so he was a hero for many folks who thought they were being taken advantage of by the wealthy of Rome. The damage, though, to the political system was simply too much. This was the end of the Republic. It never recovered. Now, from moving forward, after the death of Caesar, Rome will always be ruled by a dictator/emperor. The Senate is still there, but the true power in Rome is always in the hands of the emperor for the next 500 years, till the end of the Roman Empire. Pretty crazy. This is a coin here of Julius Caesar. Thought a lot of himself. Took many government titles. He controlled all the laws that were made. He had to approve every single law. Even if the senators were still writing the laws, Caesar had to sign off on them. Yeah, he had to agree to everything that the Senate wanted. He thought of himself as the real hero of Rome, and he thought of him, it's weird irony, even though he was a dictator, he still called it a republic. Even his successor, Octavian, the next Caesar, he also calls it a republic, even though it's entirely an emperorship ruled by a dictator. He still calls it a republic. For many years, they call it a republic. We don't anymore, because it's not. Before, it was a government run by elected politicians, hundreds of them, across many different government areas. From Caesar on, the final say in all decisions and all government power and authority rests in the hands of one man. Always one man, the emperor. The Senate is there, but the emperor is the one that makes all the important decisions. So he said he could save the republic, but in truth, he actually destroyed it. That doesn't mean it. Don't get me wrong. We can't blame Caesar for this solely. It was already going. It was already going to happen. The republic was probably doomed. It was probably going to collapse. Whether it was Caesar or someone else, it was going to collapse. Caesar just happened to be the man holding. How's it go? He's the one who's caught red-handed. He's the one who was there when it actually ended. This is the Roman world at the end of the Republic. It's huge. I mean, look at it. It's massive. All of the sort of the yellowish areas, the tan areas, are all actually part of the Roman Empire, and all the brown areas are what they call client states. These are territories that work with Rome. They're allies of Rome. They pay taxes. They give soldiers, but they're, I guess, not technically part of the Roman Empire, but they're allies of the Romans. Kingdom of Bosporus over there, Armenia, Parthian, Mesopotamia, Syria, all of Asia Minor there. The Roman Empire will expand much bigger than this in coming years. Still takes another almost 300 years before it reaches its greatest size. It will conquer almost everything on this map eventually. All of this, all of this, all of this, all of Northern Africa, all the way Britain, all of England. All of this will eventually fall under the power of the Romans. Anyway, that's it for the Roman Republic and the fall of the Roman Republic. And then the next 2 chapters, we will talk about the empire and everything that happens at the end of the empire. Thanks for sitting through with me, and we'll see you next week. Ciao.